Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this great youth summit, the Thinkers Youth Summit, this 2022 edition. I'm privileged to be involved with you guys. Let me say kudos to Amos and the rest of the organizing team for putting this program up. I don't take this lightly. I know you guys have had to work through difficult circumstances to pull this together, but you're making a difference. I want to encourage you to keep fighting and keep pushing hard. You will get there. You are creating the pathway for many to find their bearing, even as they pursue their career path um, individually. So this Thinkers Youth Conference 2022 is tagged. The topic I'm supposed to be addressing is governance, good governance, a tool for sustainable development and growth. That is quite a boggy topic, but we'll try to simplify as much as we can for the sake of the goal of the conference and for the time we have as well. All right. Now we will begin by trying to simplify um, all these boggy terms in the topic. You hear good governance, you hear sustainable development, you hear growth, and obviously you will be hearing government, you will be hearing institutions as well. So let's begin first by looking at what good governance is. I suspect this is a very familiar subject given our post-war experience in Liberia. Good governance actually is a process, of measuring how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage resources in a way that is free of corruption, that is equitable, that is transparent, that guarantees the realization or the maximum output for the benefit of the citizens, um, even as people pursue their individual aspiration within the ambit of the state system. The whole good governance, concept talks about the way the state system conducts its affairs, such that it manages public institutions, it manages public resources with the intent of giving equal access of those resources to every citizen, to everyone. And that is only possible when good governance subscribe to certain benchmarks. In fact, no governance is good enough until these benchmarks are met. And those benchmarks will include such things, as free and fair election, of course. That is a beginning point that legitimizes any constitutional authority, right? You want to talk about equal rights of all citizens. You want to talk about inclusive participation. You want to talk about the protection of human rights. You want to talk about transparency. You want to talk about um, avoiding the abuse of power. You want to talk about the rule of law. And those things, those are the fundamental benchmarks that define whether a governance is good or not. So that in the context of the state system, when these benchmarks, when these requirements are subscribed to in the discharge of the affairs of constituted authorities, it is considered good governance. Now, so that is supposed to be the tool, according to this topic, for sustainable development. I might need to be quick to say that one primary objective of good governance is not just to subscribe to all these fundamental benchmarks, which are required, obviously, but it's also to ensure that development is not cosmetic, it's not intermittent, it's not casual, it's not something that serves a political purpose. You want to make sure that development is sustainable, a kind of development that justifies, right, the use of natural resources, that justifies the legitimacy of state actors, the kind of development that commiserates with the demands of the state or the citizens, so that social services are provided, people are secure, and the dreams and aspirations of individual citizens can be pursued within an environment of security, peace, and success, right? Now, so that brings the discussion to the idea of sustainable development. If we say that a development is sustainable, what do we mean? Sustainable development actually is a kind of development that meets the needs of the current generation and also maintains, supports, or sustains or enables the ability of the next generation to also have their own needs met. In other words, sustainable development is a development that outlasts the current generation. We are supposed to do development in such a way that the next generation is not compromised, right? And that's where the idea of environmental concerns sometimes come in, because as development initiatives are engaged, whether it is, exploring natural resources, forestry, fishing, mining, and things like that, sustainable development demands that exploration, that economic venture, right, does not just serve the purpose of this generation so that revenue intakes contribute, to the provision of social services and the improvement of livelihood for the country, but that after this generation passes, the next generation is not in danger, whether by the depletion of those resources or by the injury of the environment and otherwise. That's what sustainable development is. So to put that back, we define sustainable development as not just meeting the benchmark of integrity, transparency, the rule of law, and such things as inclusiveness, protection of human rights, but we want to make sure that those developments outlast the current generation. In other words, after this generation has passed, we want to make sure that the next generation is secure, that the ability of the next generation is capable enough, right, to sustain their generation, and then they can pass that on to the other generation. We have to be very conscious of that. So our good governance is mainly on two fronts. It's the front of subscribing to the tenets of democracy, which includes the rule of law, equity, equal distribution, inclusiveness, transparency, lack of corruption, protection of human rights, but also the preservation of the interests of the next generation. Those are very key issues that, especially for young people, we need to be very, very conversant with these realities, because we could be blindfolded by the pressure and the demand of the current generation for the provision of social services, job creation, and things like that, to the extent that we compromise the next generation. Because if we do not do development, whether in the terms of exploration or other economic ventures, bilateral or local, in a way that protects the interests of the next generation, whether on the line of the protection of the environment or the sustainability of natural resources and the empowerment of the current generation or the next generation in the process. Sometimes you want to call it local content involvement, which means that as we do development, as we engage in economic ventures and activities to generate revenues, to improve the living condition, the living standard of the country, we are also incorporating the practical conscious, intentional involvement of especially the youth, so that they grow into that development experience, and by that inherit the template of good governance that protects the environment, that protects the next generation. These are key issues. That's why we must demand for equal participation. The youthful generation. I mean, it's obvious. All the statistics that have come up show that more than 60% of Liberia's population is youth, between 15 to 35. That is very powerful. So a key element in good governance will be to incorporate this sector of our population, the youth, into our development activities, thereby grooming this youthful generation to take responsibility when this current generation shall have passed. All right, so that is good governance, and that is sustainable development. But there's also an element of growth here, because we say good governance, a tool for sustainable development and growth. Growth is the effect on the processes, on the progress of economic activity. In other words, when we engage in credible, profitable economic activity, it's going to impact on the country in terms of its capacity for revenue intake, whether it's the GDP or the GNP, all of that talks about the expansion of our revenue base. That's growth. Growth can also be seen in the increment of the population. So anytime there's an increment, whether in population, whether it's in revenue generation, whether it's in the improvement of social service provision, or whether it's in the educational sector, anytime there is progress in any area of the state system, that is growth. It can be economic, it can be population-wise, it can be professional growth and expansion. So growth actually talks about progress or improvement on the state of being in the country. So we want to make sure that good governance becomes a tool for that progress, whether it is in economic progress or population progress or professional improvement or whatever. Good governance should lead to that. All of that cannot be adequately applied, adequately, understood without the factor of government. All right? And I know that we're very familiar with the idea of government, right? It's defined as the institution and the processes through which public policies are made for society. Public policies basically talk about the regulation, the laws, the decisions that are made that impact the general population, right? In the simplest term, those are public policies. And it's only the government that has the constitutional authority to make those decisions, those policies that impact the lives of the people in the country. The question then is, how should we govern? If good governance should be a tool for sustainable development and growth, we know that good governance is a measure of how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage resources in a way that is equitable, that is free of corruption, that is transparent, that is participatory, that protects human rights, and you name it. Those good governance should lead to sustainable development, a development that does not compromise the welfare, the livelihood of the next generation, that we should develop now, but that development should at the same time empower the next generation to also develop. So these are very important concepts. How must we do that in order to achieve sustainable development and growth? We have to first consider what institutions are. The government itself is a public institution, is a political institution, is a public service institution, if I may say that. But within the structure of the government are social institutions as well. What are social institutions? Social institutions basically are structures of society, right? That are organized to meet the needs of people, mainly through established procedures. That's what social institutions are. For example, Koyaso, this youth organization, is a social institution. It is a kind of structure that is established and is conducted through procedures that are clearly understood by the members of this youth organization, and it becomes a platform for developing, youth productivity, active participation, personal development, and things like that. So that is a social institution. It is a private sector institution. In the context of the government, it becomes a political institution because the government is the constituted political entity that is the overarching system within which all of these institutions functions. But social institutions, to be understood properly, are actually divided in two categories. There is the small social institution and the large social institution, the macro, MRCRO, and the macro, MACRO. What is a macro social institution? The macro social institution basically, talks about the practices of society that are created to meet the basic needs of individuals. And those institutions can be defined in the context of the family or marriage or just social networks, right? Those are macro social institutions. You want to consider COYASO, right, that has organized this Thinkers Youth Conference as a social institution. Its objective is to meet the basic needs of the young people that are part of this group. Those, the aspiration of young people, career development, career path, the social platform to interact, to cultivate good friendship and things like that. That is a macro institution. But there's also what you call the macro institutions. The macro institutions are the practices of society, that are created to meet the needs, important, very critical secondary needs of society. Secondary needs, just talk about needs on the larger phase, like the economy of the country, like state system, the judiciary, for example, the state security, what it is, police, military, intelligence, all of those are security infrastructures. Those are institutions. They are social institutions, but they are government institutions. Those institutions actually are the functionaries of the state system that contribute to the whole governance architecture, right? Now, on the one hand, the macro social institutions are constituted authorities. They are, some of them are customary, some of them, are constitutional, depending on their different levels. Others are cultural, are social, are natural, right? We develop friendship, for example, in informal ways, but as informal as our friendships are, they are still institutions because they create opportunities for people to interact, whether in the context of youth or adults or marriage institutions or family institutions. Those networks, provide the cultivation of values and principles that affect our worldview, even in the public space. And maybe I should be quick to say this. The way we function in the macro social institutions, mainly in the area of government institutions, cannot be divorced from the values, the aspirations, and the kind of culture we cultivate from the macro social institutions, such institutions as family, as marriage, and otherwise. I've repeatedly said, most of the time we are looking at the fruits that are being produced, which are most of the time undesirable in our country for the most part of our national history. But we forget about the underlying factors which are probably most critical to the way we perform in the public space, in the macro social institutions. Because when we take opportunities to serve in the public space, the kind of value system that we carry in the function of our constitutional duties and authorities are a function of the cultivation of the value system that we have developed many times from these macro social institutions. And that is why a key focus of this presentation is going to actually go down to that level rather than emphasizing the public performance aspect, which is most of the time where the effort is. And that is true because in liberal democracy, where, the citizens must have access to the way the state systems are run, where there must be equity, where there must be inclusiveness, it is always the right constitutionally of the citizen to demand it of their government, to demand it of their state actors to perform. That is true. And we are not trivializing that. What I'm saying rather is that one of the things that can facilitate, right, the expected performances, right, of these people, or eventually we ourselves that will take responsibility in the public space, is to give attention to that aspect of our development, personal and collective, which most of the time we ignore because we take for granted the power that is inherent in those experiences of our, growth processes. So all of what I've said, growth, government, social institutions, whether small or big institutions, are brought into the working process that are intended to make the most of human society, right? All of these are assimilated in the way the state system runs. And the anticipation is that the state system will govern right so that the citizens are enjoying the best of what their country has to offer. So the overarching institution, that acts more like an umbrella, right, that oversees, manages, and influences these macro, small and large institutions is what we call the government. So good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in, for example, eradicating poverty and promoting development. That is a statement that was made by the former United Nations Secretary General, Dr. Kofi Annan. Good governance is the single most factor that is important for improving the livelihood of citizens and creating the enabling environment for the achievement of the goals and aspirations of individual citizens. So as we talk about these issues of good governance, we want to ensure that as we move on, not only must we see these social institutions as expression of the state system, but we also want to be able to see how what is brought into the public space actually is a direct function of how the small or macro social institutions develop, which of course all of us are a part of. All right. What that means is this, that we will talk all the things we can talk, demanding from our public actors to do the thing that they are supposed to do. We know that it's always been a fight. We change government, we advocate, we do reform, we hold elections, we hold deliberations, we hold conferences. All of those are wonderful, and we must continue to do that. At the same time, we must also begin to see and act smarter, right? By acting smarter, I want to zero our attention to the macro institutions. In other words, the personal conduct or personal behavior of individuals in these small institutions. For example, like Koyaso, this youth group, right? And we are now having the Thinkers Youth Conference. How are we conducting ourselves in this informal setting is going to spare a lot in the future as to how we are going to function when we should have or shall have eventually had the opportunity to function constitutionally. And there are two things I want to talk about that in that light. That if we are going to be efficient in the way we handle the affairs of public services, if we are going to be effective in the way we achieve the goals and aspirations of public responsibility, we have to first consider ourselves individually. And in that light, there are two aspects of the individual development in the good governance journey that I want to quickly talk about before I round this up. Those two aspects of the individual are what I call personal development and personal improvement. What I want to call self-improvement. They are very similar, but they are not exactly the same. There's an aspect of the development of the quality of the individual life that is expressed through development and improvement. One is internal, the other is external. Personal or self-improvement is an internalization of our potentials and our inner strength in terms of our morality, our psychology, our intelligence, wisdom, attitudes, and emotions. Those are internal development, or what we want to call personal improvement or self-improvement. Then there's an aspect of personal development which talks about the practical expression of our individual, progress that develops into the personality of the people we are, whether in the privacy of our individual lives or in the public expression of our responsibility. Most of the time, our focus is not on this aspect of the good governance discussion. We are preoccupied with the way people perform, on formal platform, which is true. But you see, if people don't have the capacity, it doesn't matter what demands we bring, it doesn't matter what public protests we bring, we can only go so far. So today, as young people, I want us to focus on those two aspects of the development of our individuality, the aspect of self-improvement and personal development. Let's first look at what we mean when we talk about self-improvement, because that is an internal aspect of the development of self. By self-improvement, we are talking about the inner transformation that I talk about, the development of our mental intelligence, our attitudes, our behaviors, our perceptions, the interpretation we bring to our life experiences, and the concepts that eventually evolve out of that, which becomes, the platform, the benchmarks, or the mental mechanism, right, by which we behave. We interpret life experiences, we assimilate those interpretations in our worldview, and then they dictate to our behavior. Self-improvement requires that we work on our attitude, right? That we work on our emotions. Lately, this emotional development has now developed into, a curriculum in the academia, and it's called emotional intelligence, which basically talk about having control over your emotions. Now, you see, this self-improvement and personal development thing actually talks about, empowering every young person to gain control of their lives. I cannot overemphasize this. In the situation like the one we are having, the crisis, the conflict, the disappointment, the poor, the leadership experience, the poor governance, and the conflict that come with the experience of liberal democracy and all of the attending challenges, right? We can be preoccupied with what we want and what people should do until we can lose our lives. And I don't want us to lose ourselves in the midst of all of this. I'm encouraging every young person to gain control of your life. And that calls for, self-reflection, to convince yourself that you are not just a statistic, but you are a factor in an improvement of our society, and you have a role. And therefore, you need to develop and cultivate the improvement of your potentials, your skills, your giftings, your abilities, your mentality, your intelligence, so that you're able to navigate your way through all the challenges of improving our democratic, experiences in our country. I cannot overemphasize this. And to simplify that, we break it down in the two categories of self-improvement or personal improvement and personal development. So the self-improvement is an internal expression of the development of our potentials, our skills, our attitudes, our mentality, our intelligence, to give us stability in the midst of crisis and chaos and confusion, to give us a good footing, in the pursuit of our career path. if we do not develop that inner strength, that inner tenacity, that inner confidence, that conviction, that inner intelligence, if we don't develop the morality, if we don't develop the values, right, that can keep us, that can protect us, that can guide us in the conduct of our lives, the practical expression of our personal development is not going to be effective. All right. So that also requires that we protect our mind, not just from seeking relevant information, whether it's through academic learning or through personal education, or through personal, relationship. But we must also protect our minds from harmful information. By harmful information, I'm talking about protecting our minds from the cultivation of violence, right? Pornography, for example, can infect our intelligence and disable our ability to be productive, to be resourceful, and to be industrial in our thinking, right? We want to improve our conversation level from this casual, everyday, hatai talk to improve our conversation levels, to improve the way we communicate to each other, to improve, you can see that in the newspapers, when you listen to the radio, the kind of communication we get all of the time. You and I know that a lot of times, they are for wanting. We have to get to the place where we are consciously improving the way we are thinking, improving the quality of information that we are receiving, improving the way we are assimilating those information. We can set a guide around our minds and protect ourselves from not just harmful information, but from non-productive information. Let's get to the place where we're having friendship that, is not always involved with casual, everyday street or hatai talk, but we are talking constructively. We're having conversation. We are providing, evidences. We are providing reasoning. We are providing proofs. We are bringing data. We are making references. That's how we develop our intelligence. All right. So we work on our emotions. We work on our behavior. We work on our attitudes. All of those are part of the self-improvement. We have to learn to set goals. We have to learn to consciously improve by the information we assimilate. All right. Now, the other aspect of gaining control of our lives is what I call personal development. Personal development just talk about practically setting goals that we can pursue, and we can make ourselves accountable to those goals. And we can also bring people, in our lives that we can be accountable to, right? Mentors or even friends, peer groups that can call you to book, that can evaluate your conduct, that can speak to you, that can call you to book. We need those things, to begin to develop healthy environment around ourselves as youth, even as we seek to pursue career path and to find meaning in the whole maze of democratic experiences we have in our country. I would think that as we talk about good governance as a tool for sustainable development and growth, we want to highlight the responsibility of personal development and self-development that adds to gaining control of our lives, because these are actually not just going to empower us, but they are also going to give us roadmaps that we can chart even as we seek, to grow in our career path, as we seek to be productive and credible actors, eventually in the growth and development of our country. While we must demand it on public actors, to subscribe to democratic tenets of equality, protection of human rights, participatory governance, open society initiatives, and, adapting youth into the whole governance process, engaging development activities that do not compromise the next generation, all of which are fundamental and they must not be compromised. At the same time, the key focus of this presentation to you is to begin to seek to gain control of your lives by personally improving your internal selves and your practical growth. You develop your emotional intelligence, you develop the information you acquire, you develop good social networks that become reference point and accountability references in the pursuit of the goals you set. You find mentors, who can guide you and help you in the process. As you develop internal improvement, you translate that in practical expressions by setting goals, by clarifying your career path, and by pursuing that career path through all the opportunities that life, has to offer. That is the way I want to bring this discussion to a close. And it is my hope that I have made some little sense to contribute to the objective of 2022 Thinkers Youth Summit. Let me congratulate you, Amos, and all of your leaders for the hard work you're doing. I'm very proud of you. Keep doing this. You are making the difference. You are raising the bar. You are setting standards. And I think that many of your colleagues are keen on what you're doing and they're supporting. I'm always here to do whatever I can and in support of what you are doing. But until I see you again through whichever means, I want to thank you so very much for the opportunity to contribute to this year's conference. God bless you. Bye-bye.